We're back with thinker, author, and author of this great new best-selling book, Saving Truth, Finding Meaning and Clarity in a Post-Truth World. You talk about we are in this culture of confusion. I think that's a great example of that clip that we just saw.
Yeah.
Explain this culture of confusion that we're in.
Sure. Well, culture of confusion, as I define it, based on this post-truth idea, is that it's a culture where confusion is embraced as a virtue and clarity is decried as a sin. So if you have confusion about identity or morality or even religion, you're considered a hero or you're considered tolerant or progressive. But if you're clear on these things, in other words, if you embrace the idea that there are in life some boundaries to our freedoms and to our ability to express ourselves or to be whoever we want or even define ourselves, well, then you're considered a bigot or you're considered intolerant or you're considered regressive. So confusion is a virtue, clarity is a sin, and the reason why confusion has become a virtue is because confusion allows for fuzziness at the edges. There are no boundaries or borders. So if there's no boundaries or borders, you're not on the outside of anything. You're always on the inside, and the inside is ever expanding. So that's a problem because life isn't that way. And in fact, almost no area of life is that way. Not art, not freedom, not politics, not who I am. And I think that's why we're engaged in a culture of confusion, because we want to do whatever we want, but we don't want any consequences for that. And that's just not reality.
As you talk about in the book about this term self-identify as well, and that clip showed, this hesitancy to tell this white man that you're not Chinese, you're not a Chinese woman.
Right.
And I think of the story of Rachel Dolezal, who we saw a couple of years ago, this white woman who I said that she had self-identified as a black woman. What is the issue when it comes to identity?
Well, I think a couple of things. First, I think fundamentally, it's a natural, I think even laudable, human goal to find out who am I, and to seek that self-identity. And I think it goes back to the biblical story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve's identity was they were created in God's image. He created them in his image, both of them. The male and the female are created in his image. There's something about the female and about the male that is in his image. But what was that image essentially? That rational being who could relate to something, relate to God specifically. So they're created with a purpose, and their identity is wrapped up in that purpose. And that purpose is to commune with God. Satan comes along, misquotes God, they misquote God back, and essentially they are robbed of their purpose and therefore robbed themselves of their identity by saying, I don't want to be with God, I want to be God. And so post-truth culture of confusion was sown, the seeds were sown in that garden, and today they're a full blossom tree, which means to me that it isn't surprising that we now see self-identity. Adam and Eve wanted self-identity as well. And so self-identify becomes this thing, this sort of these magic words that allow us to insulate ourselves from any criticism. If I say self-identify, you have to agree with whatever I say that follows those words. If I self-identify as, pick whatever it is you want, you have to agree with me. And if you don't, suddenly you're Hitler or Stalin or Mao Zedong or Pol Pot or something like that. So self-identify becomes the ultimate expression of human autonomy, which isn't the same thing as freedom. It's autonomy. And I think that's why those words become magical.
Let's talk about the role of the church and how do we respond to this? You talk about in the book that in one way, the church kind of wants to be everything to everybody and just embrace all sort of confusion in this culture.
Yeah.
And in another way, there is almost a us versus them.
Yeah.
What we believe is right, what you believe is wrong.
Well, and that's where I think if the church wants to get the post-truth speck out of its brother's eye, it ought to get the post-truth plank out of its own. Now, that's not to be overly critical, but I have seen it quite a bit. So those are the two sort of extremes. Either we want to be liked by everybody, so we want everybody to agree with us, so we'll actually misinterpret truths. So when Jesus says, do not judge, that you be not judged, we say, oh, Jesus is telling us don't judge anybody's behaviors. That's not what he's saying. Read the whole thing. And he says, but when you do judge correctly, judge with an unhypocritical judgment. In other words, how you judge yourself, judge other people. Be consistent and be biblical. So the church in one way says, everyone should get along and agree. And we start to compromise on truth because our preference is everyone agrees. The truth is not everyone can. The pendular swing the other way is just as bad, though, where we want to vilify everybody who doesn't agree with us. So our enemies become the worst possible thing in the world. And one of the practical ways we do this, and almost everybody listening to us will be guilty of this, including present company included, where I've clicked like or share on some social media thing because there's been a headline that happens to agree with me and make the other side, whoever those people are, look as bad as possible. And C.S. Lewis reminds us to be careful of this. And he asks this question, he says, suppose you hear of some atrocity committed by the other, and it's horrible. But then you find out later that it wasn't as bad as you once thought. What is your first reaction? Is your first reaction to say, thank God not even they're as bad as that? Or are you disappointed? You wish they were as evil as possible to make them look as bad as possible. He said the danger is that you begin to see white as gray and gray as black, and soon everything will become evil, even your own heart. Wow. I think that's what the church has to insulate itself from. If you are to be people of truth, we can't give in to post-truth.
Yeah. Oh, our time's up already.
It's been a lot of fun so far.
Thank you so much again, Abdu. The name of the book is Saving Truth, Finding Meaning and Clarity in a Post-Truth World. You definitely are going to want to pick up your copy of this great book. And if you are at the point where maybe you are confused, maybe you don't even know Jesus, and as Abdu was talking about, the author and the finisher of our faith, the truth lies behind Jesus. And if you don't know him as your Savior, if you don't know him personally, our prayer partners would love to introduce him to you today. The number's at the bottom of your screen, 1-866-273-4444. Amazing people that love Jesus and would love to spread that love to you today. Stay with us. We'll be right back.